Hello and welcome again to our episode of Hack Your HasCom. Today, my esteemed guest is Donna Switzer, and I'm happy to welcome her today. She is a certified sustainability professional and a certified professional environmental auditor who has been conducting environmental compliance audits and implementing sustainability programs for more than 30 years for numerous organizations. And during this time, she has helped organizations to understand their risks, create objectives for continuous improvements, and helped develop reports to showcase progress. She is passionate about reducing risks associated with air emissions, water quality and availability, waste management, chemical and product handling, and workplace safety. Before becoming a consultant in 2001, Ms. Switzer managed compliance programs for various manufacturers and for a commercial waste management company. In addition to being a consultant, she was the founder of Beyond Compliance in the Greater Philadelphia area and is also an adjunct professor in the College of Engineering at Villanova University, where she teaches engineers sustainability and auditing principles to improve design, construction, and operation of equipment, processes, and infrastructure. Welcome again. Hello, Donna.
Hi, Connie. Thanks for having me. Appreciate being here.
Oh, you're welcome. Welcome. And I brought you on today to discuss sustainability. So let's get right to it.
Okay.
Can you explain what sustainability is and why should a company care about it?
Sure. So there's a formal definition of sustainability that was developed in 1992 at the Rio Earth Summit. And that is, it's a long one, development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. And like I said, that was developed in 1992, so this is not a new topic that we're talking about. There's another simple definition that some of my students at Villanova like to use, and that's enough for all forever. But what it boils down to for me is that sustainability is the ability to continue doing something over the long haul. And if you think about it on a personal level, thinking about working 16-hour days and not getting any sleep and grabbing food on the run, right? That is not sustainable. Your body eventually is going to fail and not be able to do it. So you won't be as successful if you keep up that type of a schedule. So I like to think about it in terms like that. But to be more specific on a corporate level or an industrial or commercial level, corporate sustainability programs work to identify and control risks and opportunities that can affect the long-term success of the company. So you're looking at having all of your raw materials available to you, having all of your vendors being valuable and effective for meeting all of your needs as a manufacturer. And specific to corporate sustainability is a three-prong process. There's the company's environmental footprint, there is the social impact of your operation, and then there's also the regulatory requirements that you have to meet on a regular basis. And if you scrutinize them, you'll be able to drive your business decisions that way. And
Interesting.
Coming back
Sure.
to HasCom, they touch all three of those aspects, the HasCom programs.
You mentioned earlier with the Rio Earth Summit. Do you know was that the primary driver of the whole summit, or was this only one part of that summit? Do you know, as far as historically?
Historically, during the Rio Earth Summit, now Earth Day came about in the 70s, right? So we've been talking about saving the planet since the 70s. And this summit specifically was about how is the world going to come together and make decisions that benefit all of us. And so out of that came these concepts of sustainability.
Okay. Good to know historically where this is rooted. So the concept of environmental footprint, what is the definition of it?
Yeah. So your company's environmental footprint is unintended consequences or, as they say, externalities on environmental processes. For example, taking raw materials out of the earth, like petroleum or metals, discharging contaminated wastewater into a stream after you're processing that water, and emitting air pollutants into the air like volatiles, particulate. And right now, there's a lot of talk about emitting carbon into the air as well. And taking a look at or identifying the impacts to the part of the earth that is receiving those contaminants. The unintended consequences will be fish kills or having degraded drinking water available because of the contamination that's being contributed to lakes and streams, causing smog that results in asthma in a certain part of the population, and also depleting resources that you can no longer pull out of the earth, right? So when the oil's gone, it's gone.
Any good examples of some of these?
Yeah, so one really good example I think of, and I hate to say it, I remember this, but the oil crisis in the 1970s. There was a lot of political things going on at the time, but basically we were told that we only had a certain volume of oil left. And as a result of that, oil prices rose. The availability was lower. We had to wait in line on certain days of the week to be able to fill up our tank of gas. I can't imagine that now. And so there was this panic about what we're going to do. And fortunately, as humans, we're problem solvers by nature, right? And we came up with ways of processing oil better and extracting it better. So our reserves are now what are our reserves are adequate now, and we're able to have the oil available to us that we need right now. The thing is, though, I feel like we just need to keep finding alternatives to using that fuel oil and also figuring out ways that we can use less so that, because ultimately it will run out, but it's not the crisis that it was back in the 70s when we really, right now, we can fill up our gas tank whenever we want. And back then, you couldn't.
Sure. And maybe a flip side to that coin about how we're good thought producers and can engineer our way out or come up with a solution. I'm hoping that doesn't lull us into a state of not wanting to improve on finding better ways to do things, improving on the climate. I think people just think, how do we geoengineer our way out? Any comment on about that?
Actually, I have this really great example. Years ago, we were burning whale oil for heat and light in our homes. And as the whales became more scarce, the cost of the whale oil was increasing. And someone figured out how to use natural gas and turn it into a fuel oil. And so there was a very cheap, this same person developed a retrofit equipment for your lighting system so that you could switch from using whale oil to this new petroleum gas the petroleum oil that was generated from natural gas. And as a result of that, people stopped using whale oil because it was just cheaper to use this new fuel of petroleum. And so there's a comment in one of the books that I was reading, Reinventing Fire, it's called, where the author said the whale industry was running out of customers before they ran out of whales. And that didn't make any sense to them. And so I feel like we should be applying that mentality today to be able to figure out alternatives to our dependence on the petroleum products, all of them that we use, whether it's for fuel or plastics or anything. And I do believe that human ingenuity is going to continue, and someone will find a way to do it better, faster, cheaper. And as the race, we're going to be encompassing that. I see. I'm waiting for that.
That's great, having a great optimistic view about the future. I'm with you on that as a fellow EHS professional. So here's to that concept. And relating to hazard communication, how do you feel having an effective HAZCOM program could support a sustainability initiative?
Yeah, that's a really good question. As companies, HAZCOM program requires you to identify the hazardous chemicals in your plant or your process, to figure out how you're going to control exposure to those by designing something to keep employees away or providing personal protective equipment for employees, and then communicating those hazards and the importance of those controls to the people who are using those chemicals. And I feel like the HAZCOM program, because you've already been through that process, it is really helping you nail down exactly what you need to do to improve your process. So you can use the information that you've identified during your HAZCOM program development to set goals around maybe reducing or eliminating the toxic chemicals that you're using in your plant, or increasing the protections of employees. Maybe by evaluating your HAZCOM program, you figure out that you have an OSHA-regulated cancer-causing material on your site, and you didn't really know that before, and now you need to figure out how you're going to protect your employees. The other thing about your HAZCOM program and how it helps with your sustainability program is it prepares you for emerging topics. So right now, we've been talking a lot about PFAS, the chemicals that are used in plastics, and they're used everywhere, and they're finding it everywhere. And they've now identified some health hazards related to those chemicals. If you already know that you have these chemicals in your plant and you can set goals around reducing them or communicating with your customers about the applications that you're using so that people have the information that they need. Or you can make that a goal to get rid of those, as a lot of people are doing. There's a concept in the sustainability world called precautionary principle, and that is related to, basically, it's thinking that every chemical is hazardous or has some harmful effects until you prove it otherwise. And I think that many times chemicals are introduced backwards to that principle, where they assume it's non-hazardous until you have some data that proves that maybe it is hazardous. So I think by knowing the chemicals that you have in your plant will help you to understand what precautions that you need to take for your employees. And then from a business perspective, there's marketing opportunities around those two things. So you can say to your customer base, we have a goal to get rid of PFAS from our process. Or there's an example with water bottles. They're PBA-free water bottles, which is a chemical that they found to be hazardous. So you can use the information that you've gained from your HAZCOM program to create goals and objectives, and then you can use your progress towards those goals and objectives as marketing tools to help your business.
Interesting. And then further on in HAZCOM, we talk about communicating hazards, as we mentioned, to workers. But how does this relate to other social aspects in sustainability?
Yeah, so sustainability, like I mentioned before, is about environmental footprint, social impacts, as well as regulatory. And one of the elements that HAZCOM addresses is communicating to employees. And employees are one of your most important resources, in my opinion. And many times they're taken for granted. But the impact from turnover to the corporate bottom line is huge. I had a number. I read somewhere that turnover. Sorry, I held a number of how much turnover costs. I think I didn't write it down.
And certainly that turnover is going to lead to costs, like you said, cost to the bottom line.
Exactly. Sorry. Yeah. Oh, I'll come up with it in a little bit.
Yeah, we'll circle back.
So communicating with your employees is key to retention and productivity. And in fact, I was reading in Forbes recently that there's a McKinsey study that found that effective communication improves productivity by 25%. And that's like free, right? That's free money.
Mm-hmm.
And so having happy employees is good for your company's continued success. Other topics that sustainability programs will evaluate and address when the company is looking at social risk may be around fair wages or opportunities for all employees to improve. Having a succession plan for employees is a really good way to give them the motivation to stay with the company and keep working harder to reach that next step.
Sure.
From an international perspective, sustainability social impacts look at slave labor and child labor, and those things are still happening these days. And if you don't know that about your suppliers, it could hurt you. And companies, a very well-known sport or athletic apparel company, had very bad press around child labor and slave labor. Now, they're called different things these days, but the same principles apply, where companies or organizations, many times it's cartels, are managing people in a way that they have to continue to work there because they have no other options. And I could talk more about that in detail, but if you don't know that about your suppliers, you have a risk there that could hurt your ability to continue working into the future.
Now, a good point you made about your employees as a great resource and the concept of having like a safety committee that audits throughout the facility. Do you recommend something like that, perhaps in the world of sustainability, like empowering employees in some way? Or
Absolutely.
do you know okay, is there a case study that you may be aware of
Well, a
that has
case
that?
study. I think that one of the things that I've experienced is, and we'll talk a little bit later about the barriers to having sustainability programs. You have to have a lot of people involved in creating a sustainability plan and continuing to improve in your sustainability goals and objectives. And one of the groups of people that I always recommend having as part of your sustainability development program is employees of every level, from technicians working on the line to managers in specific areas of the company. And the reason why is because those people are doing exactly what you mentioned. They're doing audits of the workspace. They know exactly what equipment they're using. They know how chemicals are being applied. So those folks are going to be giving you a wealth of information and great ideas about how to manage those items. So I don't have a specific case study in mind, but it's a valuable part of a sustainability program.
Excellent. Excellent. Great tip there. And in this discussion, these terms like sustainability and another one, ESG, they're being painted with a political agenda.
Yeah.
As you probably have heard, our listeners probably are aware of what's happening in the news and such.
Yes.
Any ideas how a company could navigate through this?
Yeah. So it really frustrates me that these terms have become politicized. G stands for environmental, social, and governance. And actually, that is a financial metric that investors are using to identify performance of certain companies. And the Democrats focus on social activism topics, and Republicans think that these topics are hurting their ability to provide value for their shareholders and punishing corporate efforts. So it's this real political ping pong game between the parties, and it really shouldn't be. Because if you're focusing on your business goals and not activist issues, then you're going to be able to incorporate sustainable ideas and goals and objectives into your ongoing business without regard to what people are saying in the media and how different parties are perceiving different topics. For example, here, there's a difference between addressing climate change versus reducing air pollution at your plant. And a second example would be having DEI policies versus protecting all employees from chemical exposure. So in these two examples, the first topics, climate change and DEI policies, are politically charged. They're a lot of activism around those terms. And they're really vague. What does climate change mean? And how can I affect climate change? What is DEI? And what are the goals and objectives around DEI? So I feel like those are very vague. On the other hand, though, reducing air pollution at your plant or increasing your programs to protect employees from chemical exposure, those are very business-driven topics and
Tangible.
right. And they ultimately may address climate change, especially if you're looking at carbon as one of your air pollutants. And your protecting employees may address your DEI type policies, but it's tied to your business as opposed to an outside perception of a certain issue. And I feel
So
like, go ahead, I'm sorry.
having valid key performance indicators, KPIs that aren't painted by this brush. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly. And focusing on activist issues doesn't always your company business values, and usually results in disingenuous messaging. And they call that greenwashing, which means that you're saying something about your company that might not necessarily be true, might be addressing what that social topic or the activist topic is at the time, but it's not really that pertinent to your company. And I feel like that reduces trust and believability in your company, which ultimately has a negative effect, especially if you're have social media negative campaigns against you.
Yeah, no, interesting. That's very true, especially in today's environment with trolls and such, and who knows who wants to throw a fireball at the company and
Yep.
run away and
And
see
it's
what happens.
and it's immediate information.
Yeah, instant. So what about companies that are successfully implementing this? Do you have some examples of that?
Yeah. So companies who get sustainability work towards incorporating primary concepts of conservation and protection into their business goals and objectives. So they're looking at what's important to the business, and then they're figuring out how to do those things better. So an example is Coke and Pepsi. They both established water conservation programs. So water is their biggest raw material, right? And so having water conservation programs will help the communities that they're in, because many times they've been accused of taking water from water sources, maybe when there's a drought situation, or providing quality water to some areas where quality water is scarce. This is what these companies are doing. And in my opinion, these are really good examples of how you're taking what's important to your company and ensuring that you're going to be able to have a future with water for Coke and Pepsi. Another example would be the coating or the painting industry, where they've shifted from solvent-based coatings and paints to water-based products. And this not only affects air emissions, it meets some regulatory requirements, depending on what industry you're in, but it also affects workers' exposure, right? So if you're not bringing a lot of solvents into your plant, that is reducing the amount of exposure that your employees have to those solvents. And many times solvents have respiratory effects and also air emissions effects.
Sure. And then especially with worker exposure, like you said, going back to what we do in HAZCOM, communicating those hazards, substituting out for a nasty chemical for something better,
right,
or less
and
healthy, more healthy for them.
Right. And that's one goal or objective that companies do implement when they're thinking about their sustainability programs. They're looking at their HAZCOM, they're seeing what their toxic chemicals are, and they make a goal around either reducing the use of that chemical or eliminating that chemical from their plant altogether. And the example of the coating industry is that they're now supplying products without solvents. So it's enabling companies to do that more easily.
Sure.
Another company who's successfully implemented sustainability concepts is Patagonia.
Mm.
The founder, I'm gonna really butcher his name, Yvon Chouinard. He started his company because he really just wanted to make enough money to enable him to surf and rock climb. And as a result of that, he empowered his managers to make their own decisions because he was on a cliff and he couldn't answer his phone. He offered on-site childcare in the 1980s, which was unheard of, which opened up the workforce to mothers at the time, which we all know that we can do that now. But at the time, there were not very many opportunities for mothers, especially if you wanted to have your kid near you. He also makes clothes out of organic cottons and recycled plastic. And the best part of what his company does, in my opinion, is he actually will take Patagonia will take back what they called worn wear products. So if you have a piece of clothes that it doesn't fit you anymore or you have no use for it anymore, and clothing and equipment as well, you can bring it back to a Patagonia store and they will give you credit and then they'll sell it as worn wear. So not only is that helping the waste aspect of it, but it's also helping in a social sense that now I can afford Patagonia clothes and equipment because maybe I can't afford full price, but I might be
It's
able
still perfectly good. Perfectly
Exactly.
good stuff.
Exactly. So that's another
Nice.
example. One more example of a good company, and then I have an example of a bad company, of a company
Sure.
that didn't get it right. Not bad. They didn't get it right. So the next example I have is Subaru of Indiana. One of their top managers said, I want to be zero landfill by next December. And this is a huge manufacturing plant, and they wanted zero landfill waste, and they worked towards it. There's a really interesting video on the whole process they went through, dumpster diving and asking employees about how they can reduce waste in their process. They came up with these amazing ideas. And ultimately, they reached their goal to zero landfill. The person who was the EHS manager at that plant said she put more trash on her curb from her house on Monday morning than that entire manufacturing plant put out in a whole year, basically.
Wow.
And
Wow.
ultimately, they've saved $11 million, right? And this is on top of the cost of the program. So we'll go back to some of the mindsets that people have that prevent them from implementing sustainability programs. So that's another example of something good. And an example of a company that didn't quite get it is Budweiser. They can't on a social activist issue, which was not core to their business, that affected their company. They campaigned on, well, yeah, it was a social activist or an activist issue where they were not focusing on things like workers' right or fair wages or union negotiation. And they received a lot of backlash from their customer base because of that. And me, that's an example of a company that was focused on external factors that had no implications for it had no, what's the word I'm looking for? It wasn't one of their core issues to their business. And it turned out to have hurt them. And I think that they even received some lawsuits from their shareholders.
Were there boycotts and things like that? That even consumers.
And the negative social media, and then from their consumers, and then also from their shareholders, because as a result, their stock prices fell.
And when they easily could have reworked that concept, like you said, with workers' rights or fair wages and maybe union issues, perhaps, there could have been another way to address it.
If they wanted to include social issues in their business, they could have found a different topic that actually they had control over.
Sure.
Right.
The KPI functions, that we talked about earlier.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Interesting. Okay. Those are great examples there, and hopefully our listeners are getting the point that what can happen to a company once they choose to get into the right path here with this. But I'm sure there are barriers. Could you explain what some of the barriers that would need to overcome to adopt a program like this?
Yes. And I alluded to some of these earlier. One of the main barriers is it's going to cost too much. There's somebody who's saying, I can't give you $100,000 to implement this program because it's not in the budget, or we could use that $100,000 to buy new equipment or upgrade lighting or whatever. But if you look at the long run and prevent that short-term focus, you'll see that, okay, maybe the initial cost is $100,000, but in the example of Subaru, they saved $11 million. That's huge, right? A lot of people see things see these programs as programs of the day. Help me out
Like
with some of
flash
the
in the
ones
pan.
that we've talked about in the past.
Yeah. Yeah, I would think, let's see, there's greenwashing or ozone, or some of those could be packaging. I'm sure there are some of those could fall into this like marketing.
Right.
That doesn't work.
Yeah. And so many companies have been like, okay, this quarter we're doing this new program, and this quarter we're doing that new program. And so people are, okay, what's coming up today? What do I have to do now? As opposed to, if you were looking at sustainability from a business perspective and how it ties into your overall business goals, it's going to be more ingrained into the way you do business. So keeping your business goals in mind is going to help you be successful in implementing these programs. Excuse me.
Okay.
The other barrier is one person is tasked with getting it done. Maybe it's the EHS person, maybe you hire a sustainability manager. And that's not the way to do it. You have to get the whole company involved. As I mentioned before, one of your most valuable assets are your employees who are actually working with these processes and equipment and chemicals every day. They can tell you what the problems they're facing are, and they might have good ideas for solving those problems. So it has to be a team effort. It has to be a whole company effort. Other people that need to get involved besides just the EHS manager would be your purchasing person. Do you have contracts in place for your vendors that have social requirements, no slavery, that kind of thing? Or do you have a green chemical program where you have to purchase a chemical that is less toxic than maybe what's on the floor right now? So your purchasing person, your legal folks, your accounting folks, because they're the ones that are going to be approving the monies and doing the return on investment calculations, that kind of thing. A lot of different people need to be involved. Your facilities person is also very critical in looking at and implementing, getting over barriers for a sustainability program. Another thing is, and this is related to just the program of the day, is I can't add another thing to my plate right now. I can't be in meetings once a week or
Bandwidth, right? Yeah.
Exactly. And that's happening these days. People are downsizing workforces, and they're expecting EHS professionals to be security and sustainability and everything else.
Marketing. Yeah.
Exactly, right? Or maybe putting reports together or whatever. And it just seems like another thing that I have to do. And again, I'll go back to, if it's part of your business objectives, then spending that time makes you understand that it's driving your work towards the company's goals. Right? If sustainability is just a program over here that needs to get done by somebody who had a great idea, you're not going to internalize it as well.
It doesn't become part of the corporate philosophy.
Yeah. And one kind of thing that I think is actually pretty major is there's no standard for a sustainability program. You have a lot of people that are measuring things. There's a lot of different ways to report things. Sometimes it's a financial organization or industrial group that has created financial measures. There's no standard way to develop a sustainability program or make your goals and objectives. So it's really hard to compare apples to apples and oranges to oranges. And that is because if you're focusing on your company's values in implementing a sustainability program, it would be hard to meet a standard. And the standards that I'm thinking of would be like ISO 14001 or ISO 45001 or ISO 9000 or the RMCS, which is the chemical standard for management of your chemical manufacturing. So it's hard. Nobody is accepting one methodology
Accepted
as
standard.
the standard.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Sure. Probably. Do you know if there's any effort towards that? Do you think ISO will ever go towards that, perhaps, or
Well,
too soon to say?
yeah, that's a good question. And I think that people are trying to do that. There are a few standards. So, for example, the GRI is Global Reporting Initiative, and that standardizes reporting, developing a sustainability report. So that tells you what topics you have to address and how you should be addressing them and who your audience is and things like that. So that's one standard that many people are accepting. The SEC, Securities Exchange Commission, they actually tried to implement some regulation around public reporting of sustainability topics. It was around carbon emissions, though, and so it was very activism focused, right?
Yeah.
And it hasn't passed yet. The Europeans are moving forward a little bit faster than the US is.
Okay.
So there are some international standards that are out there, but again, not everybody's embracing all these standards. So it's
Even in Europe, perhaps,
right.
too.
Well, yeah. So
Yeah, I think, like you said, if it's each mission value is very unique, like a fingerprint for each company. So
yes.
probably has some differences in what they feel is sustainable, but it would be nice to have a framework to work towards. But I'm hoping, like the ones you mentioned, may be a good start, right? And maybe we'll talk about resources later, but
yeah,
that might be something to go to. So if a company right now is hesitant to start the initiative, what would you recommend to steer them towards adopting?
I think I've pounded it into you enough today, but focus on your business objective, right? That, to me, is the primary thing. And keeping long-term success in mind. Many organizations who have to answer to shareholders, what are you doing for me this quarter? What are you doing for me this quarter? If you're looking at quarterly progress, it's probably not going to be a popular investment decision. But if you're looking at a 2-year to 5-year run,
longer term,
the benefits are going to be amazing. And I have an example of focusing on your business objectives. What if employee turnover is affecting production and you have production goals as one of everybody that I work with had some kind of production goal. They want to know 95% of maximum throughput or whatever that goal is. And like, how many widgets are you getting out the door? But if you have a lot of turnover, now you're down because you have to train, whatever, or maybe you lost a shift worth of people, whatever that is. Then what I'm recommending is think of a social aspect as one of your sustainability goals and objectives. So identifying how to improve employee relations. And it might mean thinking out of the box. Maybe your workforce English is not their first language. So maybe you're training people or giving English lessons, investing in English lessons for people. Or maybe it's financial management, mentoring, or bringing life coaches in or whatever to help your employees to grow in these social ways. And that sounds crazy, but if you think about it, your employees are one of your biggest assets, right?
Sure.
And you're investing in your equipment and you're finding the best raw materials. Let's invest in your employees. And you may consider raising your pay rates or increasing your benefits, right? Which I know has a negative effect on the bottom line initially, but so does employee turnover. And here again, I thought I wrote the number down of how much impact employee turnover has on a company, but I didn't write it down. I think it's a huge number. It's like 50% of that person's salary is lost in a turnover because now you have to train somebody. You have to find recruiting time, which means either HR or it's an outside recruiter. So there's all kinds of expenses to find the right person to bring in here. So again, raising your pay level may affect the bottom line initially, but in the long run, is it going to save your company money? And that's why I said, look at your business objectives, but also keep long-term success in front of your head.
In the picture. Yeah, great idea there. So now what if I'm hearing this today? I'm sure our listeners, some of them out there are convinced to implement this. Now what do they do? Where do they go next?
Right. So I always recommend having at least a 2-year plan.
Okay.
And the first step in that is to look at your business goals, find out who's important, employees, shareholders, your neighbors, and see how your company or your operation are affecting those important groups. And then understanding what's material to your company. Do you need a particular vendor to be viable into the future? Or how would a negative ad campaign affect your company if it was blasted on social media? Looking at those things that could materially affect your company. And then identify the risks you need to control. And looking at it from a social, environmental, and regulatory requirements perspective. What's your environmental impact or footprint, like we talked about? What kind of social things? And here's where HAZCOM comes into play. People have to wear respirators all day long, and wouldn't it be awesome for them if you could engineer that hazard away so they don't have to wear respirators every day? And then implement some goals and objectives around what you've identified is important and something that you can control or have an opportunity to improve in. And your first goal may be just understanding what those impacts are, doing the evaluation to figure out what your baseline is. And then next, you may decide to reduce the toxic chemicals in your plant or increase the quality of the water that you're processing or that your process discharges, or reducing the amount of fuel that you're using or that your process requires. So here's where you have the opportunity to look at those, entrepreneurial solutions to the problems you may want to address. And then you put all of that information into your 2-year plan. What am I going to do? Am I going to report my progress at the end of the year? That kind of thing. Who am I going to report those things to? That kind of thing. So I think a 2-year plan is good because it gives you that future look, but it also doesn't log you down 5, 10, 15 years into the future.
Take it in chunks, probably 2-year chunks, probably manageable.
Exactly.
And that's part of it.
Right. And the other thing is to advertise your successes internally to your employees. Look at this work you've been doing. You've been going to these meetings once a month, but look at the progress we've made in this area, or look how you used to have to do this and now we're only doing this because we've made these great changes based on your recommendations. So advertising your wins is huge in encouraging people to move forward. And then also advertising it outside, right? So it's the whole marketing thing.
Great. And so I'm right at the beginning of this program. Do any resources you can suggest that I can consult or for the company to utilize during the implementation process?
Yes. There are consultants out there that can help a company through this process. I happen to work for one. But there are also good books and websites that are good resources. So the EPA actually has a sustainability webpage, and pretty good actually, because it talks about grant opportunities to help with that entrepreneurial solution. Moving forward with that, it focuses on sustainable manufacturing and like lean thinking. So it's what lean is. So reducing your energy, reducing the amount of chemicals that you're doing. But there's some really good information there. There's other information. One of the things that I really love is the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. And why I think that's so important is because it's a group of voluntary business leaders. So these are people who say, we have a problem. Let's get together and figure out some solutions. So their website has on there, I think they have 9 core topics. One of them is like farming impacts. Climate is one, water is one. So there's 9 that they're core topics. And then they actually give some pretty good business solutions to some of them. Brownfields is an example of that. So brownfields is where you're redeveloping contaminated properties so that you can take a property that may have been used back in the day and has been abandoned because there's contamination issues, and it's coming and revitalizing that area, managing the exposures on that site, and then utilizing it for a value. Better to have a parking garage and it may have been an abandoned lot 2 or 3 years ago. So it's another concept that the World Business Council for Sustainable Development not advertises, but supports.
And help with support.
Yes. And then there's the Biomimicry Institute, which helps you think about looking at nature for solutions to things. And there's wonderful examples of how humans have done that. Aerodynamics for airplanes and things. Velcro is an example of someone looking at nature and coming up with a solution to stickiness. And then there's some nonprofit organizations that have resources for companies. Ceres is one, CERES. They're a good one. When you're searching, though, one of the things that I want to caution you about is being careful that the organization that you were looking into is not focused on social activism, unless that's part of your business objective or your business plan, right? So there's a lot of companies that I haven't mentioned because I feel like maybe their focus is a little bit on one topic and may or may not be applicable to your company. So I caution you on that.
Right. Thanks for that. That's a great tip there as well. This discussion has been great. Go ahead, Donna.
I'm sorry. There's some books. There's some books that I didn't mention.
Oh, sure.
So some of the books that are pretty good resources are one called Sustainability Principles and Practices. That gives you a real foundation of how to develop that 2-year plan, basically. Natural Capitalism is another that helps you reimagine your business and the products or services that you are providing. So that one's a very thought-provoking book. Reinventing Fire, of course, is about our dependence on fossil fuels. And then there's another book, the last one I'll mention is ESG Mindset. And that is really helping you focus on not the activism, political ping pong thing that ESG brings to your mind, but helping you really focus on how you can use environmental issues, social impacts, and regulatory requirements to help you focus on improving your business as a whole.
So like we talked about, maybe getting to those key performance indicators without having to delve into the political paintbrush that can occur.
That's exactly right. Yes.
Excellent. So this has been a great discussion, Donna.
Thanks,
I appreciate that. What do you want to give our listeners as your parting thoughts on the topic?
Thank you. I appreciate being here. It's been fun. I do like to talk about sustainability, so I appreciate the opportunity. And one last thought that I would like to leave you with is having a sustainable operation does not have to be expensive or have political overtones. Focusing on the risks of your operation, like employees' exposure to hazardous chemicals or emitting tons of air pollution. Sorry. And focusing
No,
on risks of your organization and identifying the controls and opportunities that support your business objectives will make the financial barriers easier to overcome. And get help because there's lots of ideas out there. Some of them may be good for your company and some of them may not be. And having a third person to bounce that off of may help focus your objectives a little bit.
and I think most importantly, your company's support, the stakeholders that we've mentioned, get them all in place. Use
Yes.
the resources we talked about
Yes.
earlier to
On
get in place, right?
having a team is invaluable for sure and is not a one person job.
Not at all. No. Again, thank you so much, Donna. To all our listeners at Hack Your HasCom, we want to thank you,
Thank
Donna,
you.
for joining us today. For more information about Donna and ways to contact her to get more information about the topic and resources, make sure you visit hackyourhascom.com. You'll be able to reach her, find other contact details, and of course, review this thoughtful episode again for us. So thanks again.
Thank you, Atano. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.